the big news, Jack Smith filed a new superseding indictment. Now, to recap here, around 2 months ago, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Trump in the presidential immunity case. And this was an overreach that shocked even most cynics about the Supreme Court and their motivations, this far-right Supreme Court. They had already given Trump a win by even agreeing to hear this case because it forced the case to take a pause while the Supreme Court considered what decisions were immune from prosecution if the president made them. And so people kind of thought, like, all right, they'll maybe give something weak and mealy-mouthed, and they delivered him his win because this delayed it almost certainly until after the election. But that's not what they did. They decided to give language and guidance on this and say that there were many instances in which a president should be immune from prosecution based on a distinction that they drew of official versus unofficial acts. And keep in mind at this point, by the way, Trump was ahead in the polls, right? So there was like this obvious freak out. I mean, we were freaking out because Biden was still in the race. And it looked like Trump was going to win, right? Almost certainly. Plus, the Supreme Court had delivered him this victory by delaying the case and giving him future just discretion to do whatever the hell he wanted as president. And by the way, of course, this applies to future presidents.
Yeah, so if DeSantis wins in 2028 or something like that. Yeah. I mean, and anybody familiar with like limitations placed on the executive sort of during the Watergate era for something like that, we're going backwards.
It's immensely concerning. And so the Supreme Court ruled that presidents are protected from prosecution for acts taken in their official capacity as president. And that was a problem for the two cases that Jack Smith was bringing as federal special counsel, one for the documents case and two for the January 6th election interference case. So in this new indictment that he filed, the superseding one, in reaction to this, basically he removed mentions of the president and talked about the president's campaign. The indictment was pared down from 45 pages to 36. And he specifies at the beginning of the indictment that this is related to people acting in their private capacity. Now, there are like three key things that you should know about what was removed from the indictment in response to the presidential immunity decision. Firstly, Jeffrey Clark gets off scot-free, basically. So co-conspirator 4 is Jeffrey Clark. He's been identified by multiple media sources as who's being referred to there. He was a Trump appointee at the Justice Department, and he was the guy that was trying to implement the voter fraud theories at the DOJ, basically using federal law enforcement powers to try to overturn the election. And the other part that's removed is Trump's efforts via Jeffrey Clark and them working together to pressure the Department of Justice himself. So they threw out Trump trying to fraudulently certify the election in his capacity as president through his interactions with Department of Justice officials, including Jeffrey Clark. The Supreme Court explicitly named that in their decision, basically, that referred to those interactions. So Smith had no choice because the Supreme Court said that those were official acts. Now, that's the meatiest part to me, right? That concerns me because that essentially says that those formal interactions with DOJ officials to subvert the election constitute official acts where, like, that's where power is wielded in this case. Like, if private individuals try to overturn the election, that's really wrong. But part of why this was such a threat was because Trump was the sitting president and had those powers. So, like, the weaponizing of the federal government stuff is the most important thing to set a precedent for. It's a coup, right? But
and the distinction
the Supreme
being
Court made it so that they can't do that.
Right, and the distinction I think seems to be seems to be a hang up, but it seems to be kind of clear. Like president can say, talk to a vice president about how they should rule on a close, something that cast a decisive vote on politically, right? Not these extra curricular things to do with elections.
Yeah.
It seems very obvious, not part of their responsibility.
Well, tell that to those 6 justices, right? Because they have essentially given Trump and future presidents carte blanche on that. And the other small thing he did was he changed the language from president to candidate for president. But it's interesting you mentioned vice president there, because one thing that people are pointing out Smith did that was maybe a little risky is that he did not change that language as it related to Mike Pence. So he still refers to Pence as Vice President Pence and also mentions his actions in his capacity as president of the Senate. Now, if Smith wanted to be really safe, he would have essentially referred to Pence as purely a candidate for vice president on the ticket, and then his capacity as president of the Senate, because in that role, he's maybe distinct from the office of the presidency. And like in the way that Jeffrey Clark is not included because he's a DOJ official, this could get murky, I think, for Jack Smith with a Supreme Court that seems hell-bent on giving Republicans whatever they want. So that's one part that I found interesting that was included, and a lot of others have pointed that out. But the thing is that the charges remain the same. And the good news is that basically the skeleton of the indictment remains intact. The 4 charges are conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. That final piece is really the American people's rights to have their votes heard. That is an enormous part of this, obviously, is that Smith and his team are claiming, rightly, that this is a violation of people's right to vote, throwing out their votes with this fake electors scheme, right? The electors are supposed to truthfully represent the results of the election, as opposed to, say, like, you know, a bunch of Republicans in different states like Arizona and Pennsylvania trying to replace those electors with Trump loyalists who would deny the results that were tabulated in the votes. With all that said, that is what happened yesterday. So it's overall good news because it means that the prosecution is moving forward. The timeline is still probably post-election, definitely post-election, but this was done with a new grand jury, all of that. So Trump responds on Truth Social here. He made a statement saying, no presidential candidate or candidate for office has ever had to put up with all of this lawfare and weaponization directly out of the office of a political opponent. Can you, all right, just pause for a sec. So, I pause my own voice. Pause my own
Emma,
voice.
pause yourself.
Emma, pause. Like, okay, you know what lawfare is? It's, filing dozens of lawsuits about the results of an election that were immediately thrown out in court, and then trying to muscle Republican state officials to appoint people who would fraudulently say that those vote totals were in your favor. Like, that's trying to use the legal system in political warfare, but and Jack Smith is a special counsel for that very reason. He's an independent, right, appointed to do this in a siloed way from the rest of the DOJ. But anyway,
I mean, America famously, like Lula, helped the lawfare against Lula that put him in prison ultimately before he regained power.
Trump continues, they've weaponized local DAs and attorney generals and anybody else that will listen to interfere with the upcoming 2024 presidential election. Never been done before. Okay, you did all of this in 2020. This is now Kamala's weaponized system against her political opponent. All of these scams will fail, just as deranged Jack's... Everyone's deranged. You see, everything's a retread here. Deranged Jack's hoax in Florida that has been fully dismissed. He's referring there to the documents case that was dismissed by the judge that appointed him, or that he appointed, Eileen Cannon. Jack Smith is currently appealing that dismissal, which seems like very likely that he'll win that. And we will win the most important election in the history of our country on November 5th. Make America great again. So that's how he responded. Now here is J.D. Vance Oh wait, you want to go? This is another Truth Social that he had.
I'll take this.
This was his second. Oh, you go ahead. Your Trump is better.
Well, also I'll give you a chance to catch your breath.
Okay.
This travesty is now on Comrade Kamala Harris, who is actively pushing it rather than immediately calling for its dismissal, as should be done. This is for third world countries and banana republics, not the USA. As Jack Smith knows, that's deranged Jack for people following along.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
As Jack Smith knows, the whole case should be thrown out and dismissed on presidential immunity grounds. He capitalized presidential immunity. As already ruled unequivocally by the U.S. Supreme Court, Smith rewrote the exact case in an effort to circumvent. Okay, so Trump didn't write this. This Supreme Court decision. The people of our country will see that is happening, and all these corrupt lawsuits against me will reject them by giving me an overwhelming victory on November 5th for President of the United States.
Thank you for that, Matt. And then this was the other part. We'll just go to the bottom here. This is what was pointed out. He was truth socialing all over the place. If we could just pop this up on the screen. They cheated me on the election. They go after me for cheating on the election. Interestingly, this comes at the exact same time as Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook has admitted to concealing massive amounts of information, such as Hunter Biden's laptop from hell. Which is
interesting that they point to like the receptacle of the supposed container of this massive amounts of information, as opposed to any of the information that was supposedly within the laptop from hell.
Right. I mean, you cannot speak of the devil.
Pandora's box, folks.
Such as Hunter Biden's laptop from hell, which is a direct acknowledgement that the 2020 presidential election was manipulated and rigged by the DOJ. Jamie Dupree points out that this was his Department of Justice in 2020.
Right, yeah. I think following the lore of the laptop from hell, it's been a while since I've checked in with the series, but I thought it was that like Trump or that the Biden crime family was selling America south to the Chinese for like hundreds of thousands of dollars, or maybe like maybe
even tens of thousands of dollars.
Low million count, maybe.
They're bad at
absolute
business.
Most.
Yeah, it's hard to follow his train of thought. He's kind of a lunatic. JD Vance, though, was asked on the tarmac about this in Nashville. And he gives one response here, but the second one I actually found interesting because he mentions Obama there, but here we go.
In response to the superseding indictments against former President Donald Trump.
Yeah, I haven't read the whole thing, but it looks like Jack Smith doing more of what he does, which is filing these absurd lawsuits in an effort to influence the election. I mean, the one thing that I did see, which I felt was just classic lipstick on a pig, is, of course, the reason the Supreme Court threw out his lawsuit is because they said it implicated the president's official acts, of course, which the president has immunity in conducting those official acts. And yet, Jack Smith tried to redefine Mike Pence as from the vice president to the running mate, as if somehow changing those words in an indictment undercuts the fact that Mike Pence is still the sitting vice president, and it still directly implicates the president's official acts. So I don't think that it changes anything legally. I think it's clearly an effort to try to do more election interference from Jack Smith. He should be ashamed of himself, and it's one of the reasons why we have to win, because he should not be anywhere near power.
Jack Smith.
Henry? No? Okay.
Here we go.
Well, Senator, I know the Harris-Walz campaign has talked about that Supreme Court ruling, saying that it goes too far to give the former president, too much immunity. Yeah. Your thoughts as this new indictment goes forward?
Well, I think just my pushback on what they said is, look, if the president doesn't have some level of immunity in how he conducts his office, in the same way that judges have to have immunity, police officers have to have immunity, there has to be some recognition that people can't be sued for doing their job. And, the way that I think about it is try to make this nonpartisan. Barack Obama ordered drones to strike an American citizen in Yemen. That's like the definition of murder, unless you recognize the president has some immunity in conducting his official acts. So I just don't understand how you can even have a president of the United States if there's no immunity in how they do their job.
So here's the thing, JD. That is something that we on this program have claimed was illegal. The assassination of Anwar al-Awlaki.
And I think if Obama didn't do it, he still would have been president of the United States.
First of all, that would have constituted an official act. You literally, that is exactly what the Supreme Court ruled on. Exactly. which is why we were against it. There should have been an investigation into Obama assassinating an American citizen abroad without any due process.
You should be promising one, JD.
Yeah, but he's making the argument against what the Supreme Court decided.
Yeah, we want to.
Right. You're basically saying you're outlining exactly why it was problematic, JD Vance, because presidents should not be able to do things that are on their face illegal while they are in office. Like, I would like to look into the Biden administration and the State Department's review of Israel's human rights violations as it relates to the Leahy law. Did they put their thumb on the scales to say that Israel was in compliance with human rights law in order to muddy the process so that they would come out with an outcome that said, no, they're completely in compliance with the Leahy law. These are the kinds of things that are so dangerous about what the Supreme Court ruled. So it's incredible to see him first try to make the point and then talk about Jack Smith and all his power as the appointed special counsel for this and the other case, and then turn and answer a question that entirely contradicts his premise.
It'd be nice if all the folks, say in media, maybe they have $1.9 million houses in Studio City, California, that are saying the Trump administration is to the right of the Democrats on war.
Please
encourage this guy to actually prosecute Barack Obama for that, instead of saying, hey, that actually cements in capabilities that we want to make sure that we have too.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.